Um, I may edit some of this video part out if it does take a while, just so you guys aren't sitting around thinking, when is this going to start? I paid good money for this. You didn't pay shit for this. All right. And here she is. Let's see. Erin, can you hear me? I think you're still muted.
I was on mute. I'm so sorry I'm late. I apologize.
No worries at all. I'm super excited to have you on. So for everyone that's tuning in, I'm joined today by Erin Tyler, who is the author of the new book, The Bad One, a memoir about growing up a goat. And I have that book right here. It's the hard copy. I highly recommend you guys get it in the hard copy because the audio version, I have not listened to it, but I can't even imagine how it would do any service to the amazing story that you told in this book.
It actually doesn't exist. There's no audio version.
There isn't? Okay,
No.
I thought
No.
I heard that there was an audio version somewhere.
Yeah, no. Maybe someday.
Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm very, very grateful. And I also want to just congratulate you and thank you for writing the book because it reminded me of, times when I go and watch like a movie like Birdman or Beasts of No Nation or Joker, where it impacted me not only on an emotional level, but also as a creative, where whenever I try to think of ideas for what to write or what stories can I tell from my own life, I feel very limited sometimes. And when I consume like movies like that or something like your book, your story, it just allows me to think about things differently and in a much more like, oh, I'd never ever seen something like this done before. So yeah, just thank you so much for sharing your story with the world, first of all.
Yeah. I mean, it's been, well, I mean, honestly, it's just been something I do. I get up every day and I write. And I have since 1998, which of course, because you read about the whole story in the book. And so publishing was really weird. It was really weird, man. And anytime I shared my work with editors, they were like, oh my God, please don't change a word to make it more readable or more like a book or more like anything you've read or anything like that. Please just share what you're doing because it's so authentic, because it was only meant to be me and Microsoft Word and that's it. And I was just going to work my shit out. and that's really what it was. And so I think that's why it sounds different, but that seems to really be resonating with people, which I'm very, very thankful for and grateful.
Absolutely. I also like that you said Microsoft Word because I use Microsoft Word too, but I am often self-conscious because I feel like people are moving to Google Docs now. And I don't know it just doesn't work for my writing process. But before we get into too much of the book, for people that don't know who you are or haven't already read the book, give us the spark notes on how you went from suicidal scapegoat to creative director at Scribe Media, best-selling author, cover designer for best-selling authors like Ryan Holiday, David Goggins, Tucker Max, and also explain a little bit about what a scapegoat even is.
Yeah. Well, it might be best to just start there. A scapegoat it's a kind of archetype in a family or in a tribe or in any kind of unit in humanity that ends up being kind of the dumping ground. Human beings have this kind of nasty little quirk in their behavior and the way that they interact with each other that when they undergo great periods of stress or there's trauma or anything dangerous that kind of threatens the unity of the tribe and the whole and the family, they tend to identify something expendable around them or someone expendable around them as the scapegoat. And then they project anything that is going wrong in their own world or with themselves or in their core relationships onto the scapegoat, and they send the scapegoat off, and then it dies. And it's actually a story from the Bible. It's actually written about in the Bible. That's how ancient it is. It goes back generation after generation after generation. And you might be quite familiar with the term the black sheep of the family. Mm-hmm. That tends to be the scapegoat kid that we all talk about. And what happens is you get, parents coming together, they have narcissistic traits. They may have endured childhood trauma, or, they may just have a lot of personal problems. They have an inability to be accountable for what happens in their life and an inability to apologize for it. So they identify one of their kids as the bad one, and that becomes the problem of their world. And that's what keeps, them together. That's what keeps them feeling good about them, and them feeling good about the marriage, about maybe the other kids in the family too. And it tends to be something that is intensely common. For me, it was probably more extreme because I happen to be born just naturally sensitive, naturally empathic, to the point where it was so much easier always to identify with and be empathic with everybody else's feelings and emotions and thoughts and beliefs and all of that, foregoing any of my own. And so I kind of just dove into their world and was empathic with them and colluded with them. And it turned into some very, very serious, very severe problems early on in my childhood. Eating disorders, depression, suicidal tendencies that ended up, actually becoming an attempted suicide, which failed, thankfully. And throughout my childhood, the narrative was always, gosh, I'm the bad one. I'm the bad one. I'm a burden. And when you're in that situation, it is intensely confusing because, your intent toward your parents may be nothing but love and affection. And you often, do anything you can to please them or make them happy or make them feel better about themselves. And still, because of their need superseding your need, you're always bad for some reason that is indefinable and indescribable. And for me, it started in utero. My mom would tell me stories about how I was a bad fetus. And then she would talk about how, I was born on the worst day of the worst blizzard in modern history. And, throughout my childhood, I was bad. I did this and that, and it was bad. And, everything I was bad. And so it was this intensely powerful narrative that I absorbed from my parents that sort of became my reality, that had no basis in logic and left me feeling terrible about myself. So, this went on throughout my teen years. Eventually I attempted suicide and failed. And right after that, what I think was probably the situation here was that my uncle was maybe the scapegoat of his own family. And he committed suicide at the age of 39, right after my suicide attempt. And I went to his funeral and was just sort of sitting there listening to him being eulogized. So confused because, here was this great man. He wasn't a drug addict. He wasn't a drunk. He was a wonderful father, a wonderful human being, and still killed himself, because he hated himself that much or was in so much pain. How is this possible? It just did not make sense to me. And it was one of the first times in my life that I kind of indulged the confusion and the lack of logic. And, I said to myself, maybe I'm not bad. Maybe there is something very wrong with this family. And that thought felt wonderful to entertain. It felt so wonderful to entertain. And I immediately just felt so great. And I felt full of energy and full of power. And I thought to myself, well, God, I got to write that down so I don't forget it. And so I went to my grandmother's house that night and laid on a sofa and started writing. And that was 1998. And I write every day since. Never stopped writing, never will.
Yeah, that's amazing. And then what was the transition between realizing, okay, maybe the narratives I was telling myself weren't complete, and shifting into how can I use that to my advantage instead of letting it hold me back the way that it has been?
Yeah, it was a very slow evolution. My life, I say my life trajectory was altered when I started writing, but it kind of went from here to, it wasn't a radical shift. I still struggled with self-esteem for probably 15, 18 years after. I probably still struggle. Every now and then I'll hear a little bit of a negative voice in me and I'll have to beat it down. But honestly, through writing and through and through examining everything that was going on inside of me and in my relationships, my life just became just a little bit better and a little bit easier and a little bit better and better and better and better. Every day I would get up and I would write and I would think about things deeply and examine things deeply and have this time with myself where, I entertained this thought and entertained that thought and wrote it all down. And it became just the thing that saved my life completely. And it's a powerful force for transformation, I believe. I believe everyone should write or make some kind of art. I don't care what it is, really, or meditate or do something to connect with yourself deeply in a profound and positive way every day.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I find really hard to do. Like my brother, he wrote a short story, the only short story he's ever written. And I read it and it was like, man, if my first short story had been this good, like I would have been so much more motivated to keep going and, so much more proud of myself. But when I asked him about it and like, do you think you'll write another one or how do you feel about it? He's like, well, what's the point? I mean, how am I going to make any money? Who's going to want to read this? There's all these doubts and questions that you ask yourself. If it doesn't come like naturally to you, like how you wrote the first words down and you were like, this feels amazing, so I'm going to keep doing this. What advice or what stumbling blocks did you overcome when you were in 1998 first starting to write your story down? And naturally, you had these questions as well, I imagine.
Yeah, I had the gift of never thinking anyone would ever read my writing. I had that gift. So it was me and it was the page and that was it. And I had always had a really great relationship with all of the creative arts. I was a visual artist and I went to school for visual arts. And so I think probably just being expressive like that kind of came naturally to me. So that was very helpful. But I would say that whether or not you have a facility with language doesn't mean that you are a writer or you're not a writer. I think it's more about, do you have something to say? And do you want to share things that people need to hear? Are you willing to be brave and vulnerable? Some of my favorite writing is people that I would say probably don't have a really great facility with words. Most of my favorite writers will, say that they struggle with that. And I know a lot of really brilliant writers who are wordsmiths and they don't have anything to say. So they work as wordsmiths for other people with great ideas. And I mean, if you can ever get both of those things working for you, then my God, you're probably going to just rule the world. But I think it's so much more important to say something relevant that's meaningful, that shifts the needle in this world. I think that you have to live what you write. or you have to write the story of someone who has lived what they've written. I think even in fantasy literature that I really, really love and identify with, I think there's so many elements of truth to it and vulnerability. And so, I don't think it's necessarily being great with words, right? Or even, moving a couple of people and having them say, "Oh my God, that was so well written." I think it is about sharing your soul with people.
And how do you create that value for yourself, like about your story? Because what my brother wrote, for example, is a short story about him going out to a party with some friends that he didn't know well yet. And so it was like something difficult for him and scary, which is why it resonated with me.
Mm.
But he might just think, like, well, this is something that is trivial. Nobody cares about this. How do you create value in your story for yourself and tell yourself that this does matter, and I do have to share this?
Yeah. Yeah, I think two things. I think it's incredibly important to ignore everyone, as Hugh MacLeod would say, ignore everyone. I think, whatever is considered great writing, screw that. What do you need to hear? What do you need to hear from people? What do you think should be the things that we talk about? Nobody talks about scapegoating. Everybody thinks it's just nonsense. Everybody thinks it's made up. It's it's a form of abuse, but whatever. It's just emotional abuse. Well, no, emotional abuse is particularly insidious because it infects your personhood and it turns you against yourself, and it becomes violent because you're violent against yourself. It is insidious, and that's what I believe, and so that's what I'm going to say. What are your beliefs? What do you stand for? So I would say ignore everyone and then share what's in your damn heart. Share what you believe, whether or not other people back it up, whether or not anyone agrees with you. That's the beauty of art is that it is, the last bastion of truth in this world.
Yeah. It transcends, like the need for validation from other people, and it is that at times when you're writing, it gives you that validation for yourself. When you put down words about something that happened to you that in the past you saw as like, this is the worst thing in the world, and now you're seeing it in a physical copy of a book that you wrote. It's like, now I've turned something negative into something positive.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like a beautiful thing to be able to do, especially the way that you did it, in such a visual and emotional way. I know from working at Scribe that you deal with people's fears a lot. Like, that's one of the biggest stumbling blocks for your authors. And I know I've heard Tucker say in other podcasts that you have, dozens of authors that have finished their books, but they ghosted the company. They don't want to put the book out there. They're so afraid. What have you learned from working there and dealing with that about fear and, putting your story out there for people that to read it and people that you don't know to read it?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I learned so much actually about how to have much, much more patience with my authors. I'm a pretty darn patient person, but I think when people get very close to publishing, it just becomes intense, and they second guess everything. They want to redo everything to make it perfect. And as a creative, if it's not your book, that any kind of meddling that happens is just going to rob the book and the cover and all of it of its power, because it's reached its most powerful point. We always pull the trigger at the most powerful point. That's what creative professionals do. And, when I went through the publishing process, it was my first time publishing. I did all the things that the authors do. I did everything. I rewrote everything, and I had massive anxiety, and I was, calling my publishing manager at like late hours, and and having panic issues and things like that. So it was such a great learning experience about just how emotionally moving the process of publishing is, and how important it is to really be there for people who are going through that process. Because even if it's just it's a book about the 7 rules to college applications, or it's a book about how to save for retirement, and there's very little of your own narrative in it, and you're really not sharing a whole lot personally about yourself. It's still such an emotional experience putting yourself out there like that and taking that chance. And I so admire our authors, and I admire anybody that publishes, because it's a brave choice. It's
Yeah.
very brave.
And it's also, at least from my own experience, it is the hardest part was managing relationships with family and close friends.
Mm.
Unless, if it's just, I'm publishing business tips, nobody's going to like hate you or feel super intensely about you doing that.
Yeah.
But when you're publishing a memoir, especially like yours, that talks a lot about your family and your sister, your uncles, they might have feelings come up that they were trying to avoid. And so just a little bit about my own experience. When I published my memoir, my mom and my sister were telling me not to publish my memoir.
Mm-hmm.
And they were asking me, who is this going to help? There's not as many people like you out there as you think there are. And obviously all of this comes from a place of their own trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So compassion helps a lot. But how did you manage, without putting the spotlight too much on your family, how did you manage your relationships with your family once the book was out there or during the publication process?
Yeah. I mean, that's another great question too. Obviously nobody wants their kid to grow up and become a memoirist. Nobody, like literally nobody wants that. And it was really, really tough, because I love my parents so much. They're amazing people. They're amazing citizens, and they're amazing aunts and uncles. And, and they were even amazing parents in that, their lives were twice as hard as mine was. And still, they had the courage to give me so much more than they ever had. And they just, I think the vast majority of people who scapegoat have no clue they're doing it. They have no clue they're doing it. I think it's an unconscious form of aggression. But that doesn't mean it isn't real. And that doesn't mean that it doesn't really, really do detriment to kids. And it doesn't mean that we shouldn't talk about it. And, I've had this story my whole life. I've had this story finished in this form for almost, for probably 5-6 years now. Wow. And I put off publishing and put off publishing and put off publishing because I didn't want to upset them, and I didn't want to cause them any kind of pain or hurt or anything like that. And it just, it became so upsetting year after year, knowing that I could do something to help scapegoat children, and I wouldn't do it because I wanted to, maintain these smooth personal relationships with 3 people in my own life. And that to me felt very selfish. And I knew that I had to do something more for all these children that are suffering through this thing that we don't talk about, that, isn't really even considered that big a deal. And it's because of that ignorance, I think, that, that a lot of people don't even know they were scapegoated as children. A lot of people don't know that they have adopted somebody else's toxic narrative, and that's why they drink, that's why they do drugs, that's why they have autoimmune illnesses. I think a lot of people are suffering and don't know, and I just couldn't go another year without doing something about that.
What advice do you have for somebody that's especially right now, if they're not going to school, somebody that's in their teens, still in high school, and they are a scapegoat, you know, how do you even deal with that if you're completely dependent on your parents and
Yeah.
maybe don't even know?
Yeah. The dependency is tough. It's going to be, while you're still living under their roof and you're dependent on them, that will always be tough. I would say the things that I did that helped me the most were talk therapy. I've had some really bad therapists, but I've had some really great ones too. And they are so dear to me. They're like family to me. My therapist now is like my sister. She's amazing. So I would say get a really great therapist if you can. I understand that therapy is expensive. I would say make some kind of art, write, get your feelings out, get in touch with yourself, meditate, do the yoga you say you're going to do, but you never do the damn yoga. Go to war with those toxic voices in your head. Tell them no, they do not get to own you. It almost kind of feels like demonic possession when you start to like push back those negative voices and those negative thoughts in your head, but go to war with them and fight. And if you fail, get up tomorrow and do it all over again. Starting over is powerful shit. Being able to say, oh yeah, I failed and I failed miserably, and I'm going to get up tomorrow and I'm going to go at it again and I'm going to go at it harder. That's powerful shit. That is very, very powerful. So I would do all of those things. I would write, I would make art. And, when it became necessary, I did cut my parents out of my life for a period of time. And I distanced myself from my family and my extended family for a period of time so that I could get control over, my feelings about myself, because I was never going to have them in my life and love myself at the same time. I just couldn't have both those things.
That's actually one of the things I want to learn from you the most, is because I feel like right now I'm in the process of that distancing with some of my family members. And in the back of my mind, there's always the question, will I ever be ready to let them into my life again? And if so, what will that look like? And there's a lot of, I have a therapist and I talk to him about forgiveness, and you have to forgive yourself for what you went through, and then also forgive the people that were around you. Mm-hmm. But sometimes forgiveness can seem like an abstract concept for me. Do I just, all right, I forgive you, parents, I forgive you, Nick. What does forgiveness actually look like, or what did it look like for you?
I hear a lot about forgiveness and how important it is. To me, it just seems like lip service, right? Mm. It just seems like something you say because you're supposed to say it. I think empathy always is my track. Empathy always. My parents had terrible childhoods. They had trauma. They had never been loved, never. And I understand why they did what they did. I understand why now they get angry with me and they get mad and they say, how dare you and how could you? I understand now. I understand why my sister is who she is. I get it. I get it. And I try to maintain that empathy always. And I think that empathy is not just important as an outward source of love. It's also, when you're empathic with other people, you as a human being grow and you become stronger. So I would say always, always, always have empathy with them and understand where they're coming from, understand how they feel, and even hear them out and listen to them. But boundaries always too. Boundaries always too. Because anybody that comes between you and yourself needs to get the hell out of your life. Right? Boundaries. If you don't have those boundaries, then you don't have that empathy with yourself. The lion's share of that empathy has to be pointed back at you. And so when people, when they transgress and they cross those boundaries and they maybe do things that you don't approve of, pull back. They don't get to access you like that, but still at the same time have empathy. be empathic with them always, right? Because they're just human beings, and human beings are flawed. Human beings do stupid shit. I do stupid shit every day. We're all flawed. We're all a mess, whatever. You know, it's human to make mistakes and to sometimes be petty and bitter and all of those things. So yeah, be empathic, understand where they're coming from, love them, but love them at a distance. Love them at a distance so that you can love you too.
Yeah, I love that. I heard you say that you need balance with empathy on another podcast.
Yeah.
And I think especially for scapegoat children, it's difficult to draw that line and to start shifting the balance a little bit more in favor of yourself. And so I think that's really, really important. Do you still have conversations with yourself or with your inner thoughts? Do you still yell at your inner thoughts at times?
I do. Yeah, I do. I think that stuff bubbles up. Anytime that stuff bubbles up, I do struggle with it. But it's, these days it's more of like a, more than anything else. I use a lot of different exercises with regard to empathy with self that are really, really helpful. Like I try to imagine, somebody else's kid who is dear to me and I love and would do anything for and would basically die for. I try to imagine that child going through the things that I went through at the ages that I was. And I ask myself, is that okay? And it's never okay. It's never okay. So it shouldn't be okay with you either. That's a really, really powerful exercise. Imagine someone's child who you love and adore going through and feeling the things that you felt and being in the experiences that you were in. And then ask yourself, is that okay? And invariably it won't be.
Yeah. There's a quote in your memoir that says, like with Dad, I go back into Mom's childhood a lot, but not for the same reason. With Dad, I go back so I can feel close to him. With Mom, I go back to get distance and clarity. Can you talk to me a little bit about that? Because that resonated with me so much.
Yeah. So, with my father, it's always been a struggle to get that closeness with him. To know him, to see him, to really connect with him. And it happens from time to time, and it's beautiful when it happens, and I love it. But that's always been my struggle. He's kind of just this wild animal that I get to see every now and then, but only from a distance, right? Like, a beautiful deer, nibbling on the side of the road. And I just try to appreciate him and then, move on. With my mother, her thing has always been control. She's a person who has a very kind of varying sense of self, and she's, her moods are up and down and all over, and so she just grabs onto things in her orbit and really just kind of uses them as a means to just get some grounding, right? And so when I would sort of go back and imagine, what happened to Mom? What made Mom spin like this? Why was she such a storm? Why was she, so not at peace with herself? It's to get a break, to step back, to create just a little bit of distance between us so that I can take a breath and feel as if I'm not swept up in her drama.
Yeah. That's just like, there's so many quotes like that. There's so many parts in the book that I just immediately felt like I need to highlight this and never forget it. Kind of how you said, when you realize that, oh, my family might be this other thing that I had never considered before. Yeah. I never want to forget that. There's so much wisdom in your book like that. Mm-hmm. And there's also a lot of just maybe what makes it feel so much like its own world to me is that you have some of your own like vocabulary and like scapegoating. I'd never heard of that term the way that you use it. And then your dreams, like all the vivid description of your dreams, you can almost remember some dreams you've had that were like that. What did you, I feel like a lot of people don't take dreams very seriously.
Mm.
And when they do entertain them, it's mainly just for that, the purpose of entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
But in your memoir, the dreams were one of my favorite parts. And I feel like that's one of the, you learn a lot about Erin and your relationship to your dad through your dreams.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some things that you took away from your dreams, or why were those so important to include? What did they teach you?
Yeah, so essentially the reality of a scapegoat kid is your conscious goes to war with your unconscious. And your dreams are everything that's happening in your unconscious. There's two levels to being a human being. There's all the deep, powerful flight or fight, and the survival and starvation and protection. All of those things are in your unconscious. And everything that goes on at surface level, that's going to be the narrative of the family. And so things that are unfelt at the surface level get worked out in the unconscious. And that was what was happening with me. I would go to sleep every night, and almost every night have a nightmare. And the nightmare was, I was working out all of this stress and these terrible feelings that I had, sort of having all of this trauma projected onto me. And so from a very early age, I began really having some pretty terrible nightmares, and I never forgot them. And when I started writing, that became an early source of truth for me. Well, if I was such a bad kid, why was I having these nightmares? If it was me doing all of these bad things to all these people, then why is it every time I fell asleep, I would be torn to shreds by sharks? So my dreams were kind of an early hint at what was really kind of emotionally going on, the things that I couldn't feel yet or didn't really have access to. And I would say every scapegoat kid needs to pay intense attention to their dreams. It's powerful signs and signals.
Another one of the terms that I don't know if you invented this or where it came from, but Erin type relationships. I feel like everyone can call their relationships, by their Nick type relationships. But the Erin type relationship is, and I feel like people can do that because all relationships are so universal, and we all experience a lot of the same things, even if we think we have it totally different and we're super unique. Can you explain for people what an Erin type relationship looks like?
Yeah, it's not good. It's not good at all. I would get into relationships with very narcissistic people, and I would play the same kind of enabling role that I played in my early relationships. And it was basically just a recreation of those early relationships. That's what you do when you experience trauma. And if you're a scapegoat kid, you are traumatized. You are experiencing trauma. And so all of the things that you can do to release trauma, you should be doing on a daily basis. It is trauma. Emotional trauma is trauma. And so what we do when we endure trauma, it sticks in us, and we recreate and recreate and recreate until we can get rid of it. And that's what an Erin type relationship was for me. I would find somebody who didn't see me but really needed me because they needed to work on themselves or feel good about themselves. And they would sort of use me in that capacity, and I would just kind of stay in their orbit and feel like crap the entire time.
Mm. What does an Erin type relationship look like nowadays?
Oh, very different. Very, very different these days. I don't even have Erin type relationships anymore. I don't know how, but I ended up picking like the most amazing, empathic, sweet, kind, self-sacrificial man ever to marry. And I have two amazing sons, and I live the idyllic life. I mean, it's almost ridiculous. It's so idyllic. We don't even fight. I mean, it's crazy great.
Hmm. I wanted to ask you, how does somebody know if they're in an Erin type relationship? But you kind of described what it is. And one of the ways that for me, I sort of have learned things in my life is through not people that I know personally, but maybe like mentors or, role models that, like, I'll give you an example. When I was in senior year of high school, I read Tucker Max's books for the first time. And I didn't like them because of like, oh, I want to do all this like partying and all that kind of stuff. Nothing to do with that. It was just, he's telling the truth. And I saw people in my life doing the opposite. And so I wanted to tell the truth too. And so, I don't know Tucker personally, but reading his books and sort of following his story has taught me that I can do the same thing. And, how important do you think role models outside of your family members are? And who were some of your role models when you were still going through a lot of the pain?
Yeah. Truth tellers, for sure. Truth tellers, great artists, great writers. My favorite writer of all time, and this woman named Maria Hornbacher. She wrote a couple of memoirs and a couple of novels. She wrote this incredible book about surviving anorexia called Wasted, and it's profound and beautiful. I've read it probably 30 times. She is an extreme truth teller. She wrote another book called Madness, which is just equally as good, and I've probably read that as many times. Yeah, anybody who was a truth teller, absolutely. I was so drawn to. And I think it's so important, truth, in this age that we're living in. I think if you're willing to live in truth in this day and age, you are a radical human being. Everyone lies. Everything is a lie. The Catholic Church is supposed to protect children. That's a lie. Politicians are supposed to do what their constituents want. That's a lie. The president lies. Corporations lie. The FDA lies. Everyone just spews forth lies constantly. Everything is a goddamn lie. And I think truth is so attractive for that reason. And I think if you're willing to live in truth, you are a radical human being, and you should publish immediately.
Definitely do that with Scribe too.
Yeah.
I mean, just following Scribe for the last 4 or 5 years, it's amazing to see what you guys are doing, not just for other people, but also for yourselves. And it's such a beautiful representation of, help yourself before you help others. It's like, you guys aren't just telling other people that they should write their books and tell their story. You've got people like you have published your memoir. There's JT's memoir. There's Charlie Hone has published a couple books. There's so many stories at that company.
Yeah.
And I know we're almost out of time. So the last question that I want to ask you is, how do you want to be remembered?
Oh, wow. That's a really good question. As a good mom, probably. As a good mom and a good friend and a good wife.
As a good mom, a good friend, and a good wife. You heard it here first. Erin Tyler, thank you so much for joining me, and congratulations again. The Bad One, a memoir about growing up a goat. It's on Amazon right now. And when you get it in the mail, it's not just a book. It almost feels like something that, like something that you shouldn't have. It's so enticing, and it's so beautiful. Thank you so much.
You are too sweet. Thank you, hon. This has been really, really fun.
I agree. I had a great time. Have a good weekend. Take care.
You too, hon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.